All right, let's see here. So who here has heard of Herb? Who here writes ERB at all?
Like ever?
Who here has ERB in their code base?
Yeah, man.
You have Hamel?
Oh, God.
So actually, I asked this question, but what I'm about to talk about actually today applies just to ERB, but the architecture in theory will apply to all templates in Rails. So for those of you who haven't heard of Herb, Herb is a new tool chain today for HTML and ERB, and it has cool things like has a I guess it's made by this guy named Marco. Have anyone heard of Marco Roth?
Yeah.
He's been in the open source community. It is a lot of things, and I need to be very careful about what parts I'm talking about today. But the crown jewel of it is that it is a C-based parser of HTML.erb files. And that allows you to do a lot of cool stuff. It's a fork of Prism. So it uses a lot of the Prism architecture, but to parse files that are in two languages at the same time, which is very cool. It has lots of great stuff. One of the main things is that it provides like really modern tooling like LSPs and auto formatters and linters and basically all the things that if you were working in ERB a year ago and you're like, wow, this feels like the Stone Age. I wish it did all the stuff the TypeScript kids were doing. It basically brings the DX closer to TypeScript is kind of the sufficient way of saying it. Marco, who runs the project, has been like on a tear. I don't know who's paying for his travel, but it is he is everywhere. He is. I think he's spoken at every conference I've looked at a lineup for.
He went to the Tropical Rails and then went to Rikaidi.
Yeah.
Which is just nuts.
Yeah.
He's been rocking out.
Yeah, so he's spoken at 7 conferences this year already that are on YouTube. Anyways, that is to say, go watch his talks if you want to know what Herb is. I don't have time to tell you what it is. What I'm going to tell you is what it's been like adopting it at GitHub, and why I think you should do the same now and not later. And I'll also share a few things that you'll wish I didn't tell you about ERB. So the Rails core team is interested in having Herb replace eRuby and just generally become part of Rails core, which is why we are working on it at GitHub right now, because GitHub tries to sit ahead of the Rails major releases. I would also guess that we are probably the most prolific renderer of ERB in the world. Basically, we use it on every web request we serve, which is like 10 billion web requests a day or something like that. And so Marco reached out to me in September asking me to help do some of the primary like real world validation of the project. Talking about prolificness, we have 500,000 lines of ERB, or we're pushing that amount, 10,000 files, about 50 lines of file. And despite building more, only building our new UI in React, we're actually adding more ERB than ever, probably just because of AI. Like this is kind of, it's hard to see from this graph, but you can see in the last 2, it's actually the gap has gotten bigger in the last year, which I find really interesting.
8,000?
Those are the number of files, and this doesn't include some of our view components that are in another package. So while the Herb obviously has a test suite, right? But there's really no substitute for testing this kind of major architectural change that's going to happen in Rails against something like GitHub. So I've been doing that since December now. And when I started out, Herb could not even parse all of our ERB. There were a lot of errors in our code that it found, but we also found shortcomings in Herb itself. So the first milestone for us was really simple. I'm not going to get into it, but yes, the Herb linter is written in JavaScript, which is,
how dare you?
It's mainly for integration with Visual Studio Code, like it integrates more cleanly in that stack. So there's one rule that we turned on, which was just, does it parse? And the first time I ran the linter, only 75% of our code base passed, which meant that I had 2,768 files to fix. Thankfully, the bugs it caught were ultimately pretty benign. Like, so for example, we had like a p tag with no missing p, or we had like a div tag with a missing thing. And what's nice is I learned that browsers, if you like load this rendered HTML in the browser, it will have the closing p tag. The browser just puts it in there for you, which is nice. So helpful. They'll do it for you. But there are also cases where we'd have like a conditional and we would swap the end tag and like the end HTML tag and the end ERB tag. Maybe a little more tricky, right? Because if you have like a out of order closing, you could get layout issues. In other cases, we did things in ERB that are really hard to parse into an AST. So like we had actually 50 of these in our application where we'd conditionally wrap something.
Right.
So how do you build an AST for this that like that you're confident is always going to be correct? That was really tricky. So we had to fix some of those, which we fixed these using capture. We would conditionally put the captured content in. As it turns out, Herb, they figured out a way to build this into the parser to support conditional wrapping tags. I actually think that this code is better because I think it's more robust and that it's a little less error prone. I actually think this is better. So you could imagine though, this was probably a really painful refactor and you would be wrong. Because I just used AI to do all of it. So one of the things I discovered in this project is that you can, Herb has -- fix for a bunch of stuff, but obviously that is a more complex refactor. But I literally just copied the Herb errors in verbatim and it clawed one shot every time, no errors. I literally changed 2,700 files, never had it corrected. 100% success rate, very successful. I'm really happy with that. Some of the bugs it caught were really serious. So for example, we had lines of code that said these things. Invalid Ruby in our templates. So how could that be? We were running ERB linked. We have a pretty good test suite. These lines of code were never reachable outside of production. Well, that is to say that our test suite did not execute them. And this is, I would guess, pretty common in a lot of Rails code bases. Like you don't exercise every branch in your test suite. Well, if you don't exercise the branch, the Ruby doesn't run. So because Herb uses Prism to actually parse the Ruby and ERB files, you get all these issues right on, right at runtime. So we passed the linter after like 3 months of work, both getting tuning the linter configuration and fixing all these bugs. And I went to run CI and it was very red. And that was because there were bugs in Herb. So what I basically did is I took Herb, and Herb provides an engine that is a drop-in replacement for eRuby. And we caught a few white space bugs. So for example, we had this code that in eRuby and Herb did some different white space things. This is a common thing as you're dealing with a template language drop-in. Another one was that we would have, this was a lot more serious, is that if you wrote this code, it would actually produce invalid Ruby, which is really scary because for those of you who don't know, ERB is not actually a language. It is something that is compiled into Ruby. So that's what these handlers do, is they actually take your ERB and they turn it into Ruby code that's evaluated. So what this means is that if you don't run your ERB in CI, Rails doesn't actually compile your template until the first time it is rendered in production. It's a lazily evaluated system by default. So this would be a runtime exception. It caused by migrating to Herb. So very scary thing to wake up to. This is actually an issue with Rails, I would argue, because Rails just blindly trusts whatever your template handler gives you, whether it's Haml or Slim or Herb. There's some things we can do about it. So while I think we need to add safety measures to Rails for this issue, Marco actually added a safety measure. This is turned on by default in the Herb analyze command, and it basically runs Prism against the generated output from Herb, so it self-validates when you're using the tool, which is great. The invalid Ruby issue becomes way trickier though when it comes to ERB provided by gems though. So like we have prime review components, and you might have like a dashboard from something like Good Job or GraphQL Ruby. And currently all the Herb CLI commands, including the analyze tool and the linter, auto-ignore the vendor directory. And that's even if you vendor your gems. So if a gem includes ERB that Herb cannot parse, it could crash production at request time because it's coming in through a different source. And it's not being checked in your tool chain. I have a pull request open to change that default. In the meantime, we have a custom CI check we do, which actually just force compiles all of our vendored ERB files, and it has caught a bunch of incompatibilities. We've also opened PRs. If you start to adopt Herb, you might notice that there are PRs in the ecosystem fixing invalid ERB just everywhere, because everyone who adopts it's just oh yeah, GraphQL Ruby's dashboard had a missing closing tag and it failed our build. Right. Really underscores the fact that when you pull in a gem, even templates, you are exposing yourself to the risk that comes from it. So I had this whole deadline. I was April 1st, end of the quarter. I'm gonna ship it into prod. And as a final verification step, I turned on Herb, and we had a production cluster where that you can throw traffic at. And we saw no impact on runtime performance, which was great. We're cool, ship it. And we looked at one metric, boot time. our application took 50% longer to boot. And that is a price you pay on every CI run, every deployment stage. So we deploy in like tiers, which meant that like we deploy in 8 tiers, I think like a 8-ring rollout, which means that our deploys would take 8 minutes longer because we're going from 2 to 3 minutes per container. So after some investigation, we identified the cause, which is that Herb takes a lot longer to compile templates than eRuby does. And depending on the size as the template, it's actually an order of magnitude slower. And in a typical Rails application, like I said, this happens when you first render a template, which is at, lazily at, when that template is first hit by the first request to that process. The problem is that if this is slower, that first request to that template is slower. So this is called the cold render problem. This is already an existing problem in Rails. This can really become a huge problem when you have an application with a ton of templates that you regularly deploy, because that cache is wiped out every time you deploy because they're cached into memory after that first render. So in GitHub.com, we use a tool called ActionView Precompiler that does this at boot time. So it attempts to go out and guess how every template is going to be rendered, and it compiles it at boot time, which is why we saw our slowdown at boot time and not at runtime. This also happens to save a ton of memory. We save about 500 megabytes per container, or about 50 megabytes per process. So what's nice is that, as I'll show you in the next slide, I have a PR that is upstreaming this into Rails that is probably about to land in the next couple of weeks. So while we've explored a few solutions to this issue, one of them is a build time cache like Bootsnap. So we actually were able to cut our boot time below 2 minutes because we're actually doing all this pre-compilation at Docker build instead of at application boot. We're currently blocked on using Herb in production for this reason until it can be optimized. The good news is that that Marco thinks we can get around this, and that he actually has not done any performance optimization in Herb, which is comforting because that means that there's opportunities, right? It's not like all the low-hanging fruit's been picked. So like I said, I have a PR to Rails. Go thumbs up to it if you care to. The other nice thing is that because we'll be pre-compiling at least hopefully most of your templates at boot time, we will catch any of the Herb errors at boot time and not at runtime, which is a nice win. So there's still a lot of work to do here. For one, even after testing with our 500,000 lines of code, Herb does not pass the eRuby test suite. So there's 120 tests or 108 tests in the eRuby test suite. There are still 8 of them that are failing. So that just goes to show how much we are still not covering of like all the weird edge cases and functionality, which is where you all come in. Like I would love to see you turn on Herb and run it against your code bases, because if you can think about something like ERB, that's a templating language, it's totally a Hiram's law situation, which is just like when you have enough people who use an API, you're dependent on however it works for a better or for worse. And eRuby is what, a decade old, ERB is 20 years old. There's a lot of code that depends on undocumented behavior. So what's next for us? Besides that performance blocker, there are a few things we're going to do that I think we'll see value from. One is we're going to remove ERB lint, because Herb, I didn't really mention this, has a linter that implements all the rules in ERB lint, and it happens to be much faster and is maintained. It's great. Right. We're also going to drop ERB lint GitHub, which is our customization of it, because Marco has already opened PRs to pull all of our rules in. The other thing is that we'll turn on more Herb rules. Like we just have the parser working. We have actually used almost none of the rules. There's some new things, there are some new rules that can enforce that were much harder to write in ERB lint. But the most interesting one is that I have a working ERB to React transpiler that I will talk about in January, and I'm going to be looking at ways of automatically getting rid of all our ERB using Herb, ironically. So with that, overall, I've been really impressed with the work Marco has done on the project. I think it's going to breathe a ton of life into the Rails front-end story and really help us push back against all the people who are writing TypeScript and telling us how fun it is. Yeah. I really look forward to seeing it land in Rails core. I was talking to Marco yesterday, and he thinks it might even come in this fall. So this might be pretty soon. In the meantime, please give it a try. I really have no hesitation of recommending you use it outside of production. Add it to your CI, just add it as a linter. You don't even need to switch the engine yet. You'll see most of the benefits anyways, because it's meant to compile to the same Ruby eRuby gives you anyways. So a lot of the improvements are in that kind of DX space. Anyways, thank you. Thank you to my peers, Adam and Daniel, for appearing on it. And Marco, actually, it was nice enough to review this talk last night. So, yeah. Thank you guys. I feel like that was lightning speed. I feel like I-
Good.
Yeah.
Fast and clear. Any questions?
What is the DX like for interacting with the ERB templates? Like, are you getting auto, like,
I mean, you can like,
what does it
I
look
think
like?
you can like click to follow render paths now. That kind of stuff. You'll get like live feedback in your editor of like missing closing tags and like
Okay.
all these errors. And also the thing that really matters is that AIs love LSPs.
Okay.
So if you can hook those, get the LSP information into your AI, it's going to be able to write better ERB
Okay.
for you, like self-validate.
What's your favorite rules to disable first?
Like to turn off.
Yeah, like what's the first ones to turn them off?
Oh, that I don't like on it.
I'll just ease into this one.
I mean, honestly, for this kind of thing, that is, I flip it right back to you. I'd want to know how that goes for you, because that is the real crux of adopting any linter, is just like how much churn do you want to do?
Yeah.
I will say that like when you have AI that can fix all the rules, the equation really changes. And I think that that's like a really positive thing, that if you could have a better linter, I think that this would have been too late for GitHub a year or two ago. But now they're like, cool, if you can ship whatever you can do, you can ship.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I shipped 2,700 file changes in like 3 months.
Confident.
Yeah, confidently.
In one PR.
I got it. They got bigger and bigger and bigger, and I was less and less careful.
So it made it so that you could improve and fix all of those errors without needing to like send herb up into production.
Yeah,
So
because
you
the thing
fix
is, that in production, at least today, Herb gives you the exact same like compiled Ruby.
Yeah.
The difference is that it goes through an AST. That's why it's slower. I didn't really say that. Like it's actually building up a whole tree structure versus eRuby is just string concatenation. Like, yeah, that's the reason why. It's just a fundamental different architecture. Which is why you probably just have to cache it.
And when does Marco think like performance improvements will land?
I don't know. I told him, I'm like, the day you want to say like GitHub runs Herb in production, make it fast. Yeah. The switch is ready to flip. I mean, it's just a feature flag.
Yeah.
We have the boot, I have a PR for the build time cache. And what's great is that if we put it in, I have one for Herb, and I also have one for Rails core. So if we land the attribute precompiler, assuming it lands, I will then open that PR. Because if we can compile templates, ideally to instruction sequences, that means that when your application boots, you'll never even have to go to disk for your template. You'll just like, and you won't even have to turn it into Ruby. You'll just go right into the instruction sequences. That's what Bootsnap does. And that actually was 40% faster than eRuby, which is awesome.
Wow.
So I'm thinking that that's what I'm hoping happens, is that we sidestep the Herb performance problem altogether, which is we actually just make Rails core faster than it is today. And then you're doing that at build time. You dump like a 30-40 meg JSON file to disk. When your application boots, it pulls that in, and it never does any of this stuff, like even at boot time.
So even if you weren't able to do that, like if it was 10% slower, like what would the number be where you would accept that trade-off? Or does it have to be parity? Like,
I think it has to be parity, only because, well, for us, it has to be parity. Because we're just like, our infrastructure is so tightly provisioned at this point. As you all know.
Yeah.
For God's sake.
Yeah. I think that's a fair question, though. Yeah, I don't think that it would be worth it. So what we would likely do, this is the weird thing, is that like you don't actually need Herb in production, because you don't get, at least today, you don't get any benefit, right? It gets slower. And if it's eRuby compatible, why not just leave eRuby on in production? My concern is that like, even if you're compatible, like as I've shown, they are not the same. And as soon as you have 2 code paths, bad news. Like that to me is not sustainable. I don't think that's a story Rails wants to tell. I don't think Rails wants to say, here's this new engine that you use outside of prod.
Yeah.
I think it's
one thing for prod, one thing for everything else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that we'll get there. I think that we can help I can help Marco save face, and we'll just make Rails faster and have the cache built in, and then it won't be his problem. They'll just happen to be necessary because of this problem.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, quick 5-minute break.